Call to order the 26 June 2017 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Lori, any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Mayor.
Council, any changes? Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda as written.
Second?
Second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. The agenda is adopted. Next item, open forum. I don't have any slips. Is there anybody that would like to address the council in the open forum? Okay, seeing none, let's move on. Next item is the consent agenda. Lori, is there anything on the consent agenda that's been requested to be removed?
There's not, Mayor.
Council?
Mayor, if I could remove item C.
Item C. Okay, anything else? All right, hearing that, can I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda with the exception of item C?
I'll make a motion. We approve the consent agenda less item C.
Is there a second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, that passes unanimously. Councilmember Gregory, item C.
Okay, this is about the Rose Street parking. This was approved last year by the previous council, and just for my own sake, I just kind of want to get a better understanding of exactly what we're doing there. A couple concerns right now. It's the parking lot between the Noterman building and the rest of it is somewhat separated simply by the grade of it, and I'm wondering if this works that out, if that smooths out that grade. Also, the couple other things I noticed: the curbing on the west side of the new Main Street building that's made out of bituminous. I'm wondering if that also gets corrected. And then cost sharing. Was there any cost sharing involved with the landowners in the city on this, and how did that work?
Lori, is this best for Kara?
That'd be great, Mayor.
Kara, would you?
Sure. Do you want to flick me over to a graphic? So certainly we are looking at authorization for phase 2 of the parking lot project tonight, and Councilmember Gregory noted a couple of the items that are very important to phase 2 of the construction. But what currently is in place is this existing parking lot has been paved with the first layer of asphalt. But we weren't able to complete any of the concrete flat work last year, nor were we able to complete the construction of the parking lot to the north. The daycare center was still using this space. They had play equipment in there, so we couldn't work in that area until they relocated to the new location, which they've now done. So phase 2 will include construction of this parking lot, so the grade's going to drop significantly from what's there today. And so it will function like a normal parking lot instead of what it looks like out there today. Concrete pedestrian ways will be installed in these 2 locations, so there'll be concrete throughout the width of the parking lot, which will provide better pedestrian access and some aesthetic features. The existing bituminous curb that you see out there will all be removed. That was just put in on a temporary basis due to the time of the year last fall. And so that'll be replaced with concrete curb and gutter. The sidewalk will be, it's currently paved bituminous, that will be reconstructed with concrete. There'll be some planter boxes and trees planted along the backside of the parking lot. And then additionally, if you look at the front side of Victoria Drive right now, there's this driveway apron is still here from when you could come into the parking lot. And so what happens right now is cars will use it to turn around, and it's really introducing traffic into a pedestrian area. So as part of this phase of the improvements, we will be converting this into an area with a raised planter. I guess that's not that difficult of a word for me to come up with. And some additional landscaping installed in that area to result in people not turning around there. You can somewhat see it on the plan. Was that up a page? So there'll be ped ramps at either end, and then a planter, and then some additional kind of concrete area that can be utilized by pedestrians and the like. So phase 2 essentially will complete the rest of the parking lot. In addition, the access to Floyd's parking lot that's currently in this location will be removed as part of this phase, and additional parking stalls will be added in that area. And I think that covers everything, unless, Ben, I missed something in the scope.
Nope. The only thing that
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
was that you had a question about cost sharing.
Okay.
Right.
In there. When we initially proposed this project, the properties are not all owned by the city, as Kara indicated. Obviously, the removal of the access directly into Floyd's parking lot being owned property by Floyd's. This map highlighted some of the ownerships around kind of the core area of that parking lot. The area in blue being that significant property that's owned by the city. Areas in kind of this light purple owned by Hartman Communities, and then the area in green owned by Bavaria Land Company. Both Bavaria Land Company and Hartman Communities have contributed in different ways. Bavaria Land Company was not interested in deeding any portion of the parking lot to the city, but they did grant an easement for parking purposes across the area that's being used by the general public. They were most concerned about having the ability long-term potentially put a small addition on the backside of that building long-term, but did grant that easement to allow this work to be done to make more of a cohesive parking lot. Hartman Communities is looking at donating the portion where that parking lot expansion is. So the property line generally will just follow the curb line of that parking lot. So we're only capturing just the parking area as part of that dedication. And then Floyd's basically being open to closing that access for a number of reasons, but this is somewhat problematic just given its proximity to Highway 5. But there is a gain of 4 parking spaces through the removal of that access, one of them being an accessible parking space that I know that they've historically had requests for from some of their patrons.
Ben, in the previous diagram, it looked like in this one, in the northeast corner, the area that used to be the playground for the daycare, looks like there were some additional spaces gained there, but the red dotted line still showed it following the original contour around the playground, which, if you go forward one to the one we were just looking at.
Correct. So the advent of the playground moving enabled the city to have 4 additional spaces constructed there as well.
Does that red line then push up?
It does.
Continuous
Yes.
across the north side?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you.
Council, any other questions? Can I have a motion to approve item C?
I'll make a motion that we approve item C.
Is there a second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. Item C is approved. The next item, before we start the public
hearing. Lori, do you want to give us a quick intro to this, or would it be better for Ben?
If Ben could do it, that would be great.
All right. Ben, would you mind?
Sure, thank you. We have two different actions being requested of the council tonight related to a project being referred to as HILLPOINTE. Previously, this project and property had come before the council as a sketch plat and had been referred to as the Vanderlinde property. Before I go into the specific items of the request, I'd like to take the opportunity just to remind anyone that might be watching this for the first time and hasn't been exposed to development near their neighborhood or their property, just kind of where we are in the process. So as I had mentioned, this project had previously come before the council, I believe in March, as a sketch plat, just outlining kind of how street connectivity and kind of different lot arrangements might be done on this property. This was one of the more unique sketch plat opportunities that the council and the planning commission reviewed, in that the developer provided three different possibilities during the sketch plat of what could be done with the property. Kind of a larger lot, single family subdivision, more of a slightly smaller single family subdivision, as well as more of a villa concept on there, all based upon what could be done not only with the property, but based upon some of the market demands that are out there. Since that time, the developer's taken a lot of the feedback received, not only from the neighborhood, but also the planning commission and council. And the request tonight for rezoning and the preliminary plat reflect the larger lot single family concept that had generally been reviewed by the council in that March council meeting date. So tonight, looking at both the rezoning and preliminary plat. The property that we're considering tonight, or the council is looking at considering tonight, relates to the area outlined in red. This is slightly larger than the initial project proposed at sketch plat. If you'll recall, during that sketch plat process, the neighbor to the north had also been shown as a ghost plat, some lots on their property that could be incorporated. And I know that the developer got up and acknowledged that there had been discussions even at that phase, that likely when they came forward at preliminary plat, the two would be working together to realize development of their properties simultaneously. So tonight you are seeing that in all the documentation that's been submitted. This now shows the general layout of the subdivision on top of the property that we were just looking at. The areas in yellow being those lots that would be developed. In total, there's 24 lots. 2 of those lots are being retained for existing homes. So both the Vanderlinde property that I referred to earlier, having its house retained in a new lot here close to Bavaria Road, and then the Isabel property, the other property owner that's involved in the project, retaining their household on a lot as well. HILLPOINTE Lane, I think is the new street name, is basically at the midpoint between Alley Lane and 86th Street, wraps through the property and then could be extended further to the north should redevelopment north of this property occur. The sanitary sewer and water connections to existing infrastructure take place right at the intersection of Alley Lane. So both utilities will end up being bored underneath Bavaria Road and then into the project and through the right-of-ways, respectively. We don't have depth in the existing gravity sewer from Alley Lane, so there will be a new lift station located next to the existing Isabel site. So those details will be more further explained at the time of final plat, but there will be a new lift station that serves all the area to the north of this site. And then that force main connects into the existing gravity sewer in the Alley Lane intersection with Bavaria Road. The lighter green property is proposed to be an outlot that contains a couple different things. The most prominent of which is an existing wetland area, and you can see the dash line being that wetland buffer that separates that wetland from the proposed residential lots. And then you can see a slight outline in the southwest corner of the site. That's where the stormwater management facility would be located that accommodates the majority of stormwater, that's coming from the development itself down the roadway between 2 of the lots, and then ends up pooling here before it's daylighted into the wetland and heads its normal course to the east through Chaska. Couple other elements that will be proposed as part of this development. There's an existing trail that terminates at that boundary between Victoria and Chaska at the intersection of 86th Street and Bavaria. As part of this project and to satisfy their parkland dedication requirements, developer would be constructing that trail along the entire east side of Bavaria Road to provide that critical connection to Alley Lane where the trail currently terminates, and we have that existing gap. So part of this project will realize more of a trail linkage to satisfy their parkland dedication requirements. 2 private drives are proposed within the project. You can see the one north-south private drive that parallels Bavaria Road here, serving the existing Vanderlinde house as well as one new lot. This private drive could also end up serving the property owner at 8433 Bavaria Road as a long-term solution to not be directly accessing Bavaria Road from their house. And I know the developers had direct contact with that property owner about that possibility. The other private drive being on the north side of the site, you can see both of which provide some kind of turnaround as part of the layout. Those turnarounds would be constructed at such time as those lots would be developed. And both private drives do utilize the current ordinance requirement of a maximum of 3 lots being served by a common private drive. Both of those driveways would also be within an easement that would spell out responsibilities for maintenance for all of the property owners that utilize those private drives. And that has become a fairly common practice for some areas where they just aren't able to utilize access to properties directly from from a public street. Provided in your packet, and I went through this a little bit, is a more detailed identification of where utilities would be run through the property. As indicated, the current connection points being at that intersection of Alley Lane and Bavaria Road, running through the site. And then you can see here that location of that lift station, and then the rest of the utilities running primarily through the roadways that are proposed as part of the project. Also included at this phase of the process is a preliminary landscape plan. This is the first project that not only is utilizing the new R1 residential district provisions that were recently passed by the council, but also the updated landscaping and open space provisions. Bavaria Road being identified as a minor arterial roadway, you can see much more of a landscape buffer along that roadway adjacent to this project. Also much more significant planting requirements that had been noted by the developer even when questioned by the Planning Commission at their meeting last week of what's changed from how you've typically developed in the city and then looking at the new ordinance regulations. And then a strong boulevard tree canopy wrapping through, as well as having 3 trees per lot accommodated within the project. Just comparing where we are with those new R1 regulations and the proposed development, the existing R1 regulations on the lower part of this slide, and then the comparative information for what's being provided within the HILLPOINTE development itself up above. In all cases, they're meeting the minimums, and I would say in generally they're exceeding the minimums in most cases. Few examples of what could be done within this project. This is targeted much more towards a custom build type development where there hasn't been one specific builder identified that would use all of the lots. I know the developer has indicated that's a possibility, but currently the intent is that it could be individual property owners buying a lot, finding the builder and building their home. Could be one or a handful of builders that want to take one or a couple lots themselves to build out this project. At this point, I don't have any other details. Happy to answer any questions. We do have representation from the development team here that could also answer questions. There is a public hearing associated with the rezoning portion, and happy to go through any of the conditions of either the preliminary plat or the rezoning.
At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing. Is there anybody that would like to speak specific to this project? No? Can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, the public hearing is closed.
Do we need a second on that?
Yeah, we do. So,
I'll second the motion.
thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The public hearing is closed. Council discussion.
One small question, the trail connection, is that just a land provision, or will the developer also be doing the paving and completing the trail?
We'll be completing the paving of the trail as part of that satisfaction of the parkland dedication requirement.
Thank you.
On the property 8433, the developer has a right-of-way to cross that property since it's not part of the development?
They wouldn't be crossing the property, so that private drive that's closest to Bavaria Road would go up to the property line. There's just been a discussion between that property owner and the developer about utilizing that private drive once it's in place. I know the developers indicated when you get to the final plat and recording the project with the county that there would be provisions to add the property owner at 8433 to that basically maintenance covenant of who can utilize and maintain that moving forward if they were to choose to do so.
Got it. So I'm not quite clear. I thought you said the trail would go from the southwest corner all the way up to across from Alley Lane?
The trail would, yes.
Yeah, so the trail is going to cross that 8433?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the private drive.
No, the trail. So there's, that homeowner's already agreed to let that trail go through?
The property owner has been made aware of that connection. I don't know that there's permission necessarily because it's being done within the existing right-of-way.
Got it. One other question. Where the main entrance for this development is out there in Bavaria, it seems to me it may make a little more sense to put it up on Alley Lane, but I'm not sure if there's really any sort of a safety issue. Is that something that was considered? Is that any concern?
That was something that was originally looked at by not the current developer, but a previous developer at this site. Near the north side of this property is an existing gas line easement, and I know there's some hurdles to cross to try to get a street crossing at a long angle across that. There is also a portion of that intersection that's not owned by either the Isabel property ownership or the Van Lindy property today that was not able to be overcome previously. The other side of that to tie in those two streets had some significant grading impacts on what could be done within the Vanderlinde site itself, and locating the road as it's shown here was much more feasible for the roadway construction itself.
Okay, thank you. Council, other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
I have one question. If you look at the schematic that shows the Pulte development that's on the west side of Bavaria, you can see that the buffer zones on that development are very, very good. There's quite a bit of land there between Bavaria and the houses, and there's vegetation, plantings, and so on. But there's there's a really good buffer, and Bavaria is busy today, and in 10 years or 20 years is going to be extremely busy. So I wonder about the buffer next to Lot 13. And you could see that from just a quantity of space, it's a lot less than those houses across Bavaria. And I know there's a desire to put a lot of trees in there, but it's not the same. There's one of the things I found with the new zoning ordinance is everything is great, except I think the buffer part of the new zoning ordinance is weak. And I just question if the buffer there is adequate, knowing how busy Bavaria is today and will be. And if we're doing the right thing by having a buffer looks a little bit small there. But that's my comment only. It's my observation.
May I respond?
Yep,
Yeah.
go ahead.
The most comparable lot within the property or the adjacent project that you're talking about is the 700 Alley Lane. You see also side facing, the amount of space or distance adjacent to that home is very comparable to what you're seeing on the new proposed lot within the subdivision of HILLPOINTE.
And there's really only two lots that are going to be directly, that one, that and the one all the way on the north end, is that correct?
Correct. Just this house likely has a longer separation because of the restrictions placed on it by that existing gas easement.
Yeah, the shape of the lot on the north end there will give it natural protection. I just worry about lot 13. Because for these three,
Is,
it's a concern.
the, would you
Join
like
in
to
on
see?
that. Is that a raised berm? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Is that a raised
exactly.
berm, or is it just trees?
There is some increase in grade to try to create a berm, but there's also that trail that meanders through a portion of that outlot as well. So there's limitations as to how much additional grade separation you can put between the road and the trail itself, just so that it's at a reasonable slope for people to utilize that trail as well.
This is going to be a $800,000 house? Probably.
I believe that's within the range that the developer had mentioned during the planning commission meeting.
I think the report
That-
says 5 to 7.
5 to 7? Okay. The, can you go back to the landscaping drawing? So, Ben, what I heard you say is we really can't try to get a berm in there because of the trail running through. It would impact the ability to put the trail and a berm?
Correct. To get a full berm in between the trail and the roadway would be challenging just while you're trying to keep slope going down for the trail to get down towards the pond and then back up to the existing connection in Chaska at the 86th Street intersection.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is we really don't have any options.
That was definitely explored between staff and the design engineer, and I know that they did try to accommodate what additional berming could occur, and that's what's been presented for consideration as part of this plan.
All right, thank you. Counsel?
One more question. Thinking about future, I don't know, expansion, growth, whatever, of the traffic and the road bed itself, is there a potential for that to add lanes, and how will that impact the trail placement and the berming?
I didn't mention, and I apologize, that there is a right turn lane being proposed as part of this project for northbound traffic that could turn right into this. It's very similar treatment, not only in Victoria, but in Chaska as well, for how that turn lanes have been accommodated. They've always been right turn lanes. Beyond the existing 2-lane with the right-hand turning movements at those critical intersections, I don't know that we have a specific idea that any additional widenings needed in the foreseeable future, but there is right-of-way that widening could occur. Unsure of what the timing would be.
If that existing right-of-way is utilized, will it disrupt anything that's put in place with this plan?
No.
Thank you.
One further comment. I think we can't predict the future, but if I were to guess which roads around here are going to be 4 lanes in 20 years, I would say Bavaria would be one of the roads I'd bet on. So I state that I'm concerned about the buffer. If you look at the buffers on Victoria Drive, on Lake Town, and look at Chevelle, look at those buffers, the size of them. It takes into account the kind of road we're looking at. So I just worry about Bavaria because Bavaria is going to be very much used road in the future. So I'm concerned about the buffer on that one particular lot.
I know we're kind of speculating, but with the roundabouts at the further south on Bavaria, will that carry significantly more traffic in the future?
You might be better positioned to respond.
In both the 2008 county transportation plan and the update that they did in 2014, I think it was, it shows in their 20-year plan, Bavaria staying as a 2-lane road. And that was with higher traffic projections than I think we're seeing with the current update that's going. So County Road 11 has quite a bit more traffic on it than this one does, and even that wasn't tripping the need for a 4-lane in the 20-year plan. So I think we're quite a ways out from that.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yep, go ahead.
One question. Ben, am I correct in reviewing this, that this is in full compliance with R1, no deviations?
That's
from a zoning
correct.
standpoint? Thank you.
Okay, council, final comments?
Yeah, just a comment. I did listen to the discussion at the planning commission. It sounds like your definition of R1 passed pretty well, and everyone seems pretty happy with it. So just congratulate you and the planning commission on that. I think you did a good job there. And just one more question. The existing home, the Vandalini property, they're being served, I'm assuming, by a septic and a well, and then also the Isabel property as well. Are they, either of them, going to be connecting?
Both of them will end up getting connected not only with sewer but with water as well.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Ben, can we get the resolutions up on the screen, please? Can I have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion. We adopt the ordinance number 417, amending section 109 of the city's zoning ordinance by rezoning all property in Hill Point from agriculture district to R1, low-density residential district.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, that passes unanimously. Can I have a motion to approve the summary publication of the ordinance?
I'll make a motion. We approve resolution authorizing summary publication of ordinance number 417.
Is there a second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Next item. Ben, item B, Meadows of Wasserman Lake.
Mr. Mayor, there's one last motion for the Hill Point project related to the preliminary plat specifically.
Oh, thank you. Can I have that motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve the resolution related to the approval of a preliminary plat for Hill Point.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, that passes unanimously. Now we're moving on. Ben?
Yes. Mr. Mayor and Council, another request very similar to what we just went through with slight differences, talking about a slightly different property as well as a different requested zoning district, excuse me. But where we are in the process, identical to the Hill Point project that was just reviewed with the council moments ago. The property here for the Meadows of Wasserman Lake outlined in orange on the screen before you. So we're south of Lakeside Drive that once completed will connect the Lake Town and Lakeside Estates neighborhoods. We're also north of Marsh Lake Road, which today is a 2-lane gravel road, currently in preliminary design between the city and the county to be improved at some point in time, probably after 2018. The property had been presented similar to the Hill Point project as a sketch plat of 88 lots across the western portion of the site. As part of that sketch plat, the adjacent property to the south had also been shown as a ghost plat, and you'll see shown also as a ghost plat in the preliminary plat documents before you tonight. This just kind of zooms out and shows the proposed preliminary plat and lot arrangement superimposed on the aerial. So that, again, similar to the Hill Point property, the area in yellow identifying the proposed lots being arranged within the preliminary plat. The light green being outlots being proposed. Outlot C, I believe, is the larger outlot that contains a wetland currently being restored in collaboration between Lennar and MCWD. So we're talking about that same wetland here. That would be deeded to the city of Victoria for long-term ownership of the wetland and the corresponding wetland buffers. There's an adjacent outlot in the southeast corner of the site that has some upland and future development potential that would be retained by the developer. And then you can also see an outlot identifying expansion of the Lakeside Estates Park as part of this project. The one revision that I would note first between the sketch plat and the preliminary plat that's being presented tonight is that at the sketch plat it showed 88 lots. This proposal meeting the new R2 single-family residential provisions is being represented at 87 lots. One thing that I do want to note before I move beyond this is just the current access spacings. I know the council, in addition to myself and other staff, have received some correspondence before tonight's meeting through email. There were also two different property owners that spoke during the preliminary plat public hearing at the Planning Commission meeting, identifying concerns with traffic. Today, Lakeside Drive being the primary access not only to the Lakeside Estates or the Pulte neighborhood, but also the Wasserman Lake Woods subdivision, which this developer developed. Today it terminates right at this kind of pink dash line, and we're awaiting some additional settlement basically of the proposed roadbed through Laketown 9th Edition before that ends up getting paved. But today we have a little over 140 lots that are served by one primary access point from Marsh Lake Road into this subdivision, and the proposal of additional 87 lots would come shortly after this final connection over to Laketown 9th Edition would be made. As part of the project itself, have one proposed access into a future parking lot that would be constructed by the developer as part of satisfying parkland dedication requirements, as well as having a sidewalk connection from the streets within the site itself through the new or expanded park property to connect to the existing pedestrian connections or pathways within the completed Lakeside Estates Park Phase 1. Just a close-up of that property, but you can start to see the outline of that ghost plat in the adjacent property. So going back and thinking about the traffic concerns that we've heard about really had to do with the location, future extension of the local roadway to Marsh Lake Road. I know a lot of comments have been made about whether or not that connection could be made elsewhere, either within this project to get there day one, or just a little bit further to the west than where it had been shown. As noted previously, Marsh Lake Road today is a 2-lane gravel road. It is expected that at such time as the county and the city finalizes design of that roadway that it would get paved. Staff had reviewed multiple access points either through this project or as shown with this ghost plat, both of which or all of which had met county spacing requirements. So it really became a question of timing of when does that connection make most sense to get there. Similar to some of the concerns from residents along Lakeside Drive of what conditions happen with construction traffic going up and down that roadway. Those concerns have also been shared by residents along Marsh Lake Road. And in staff's opinion, having a connection planned is a good thing and probably something that should be done. The timing certainly should follow when Marsh Lake Road design has been completed, and in best case scenario, once that roadway has been improved. Certainly there's a difference between how traffic patterns will be within this subdivision, adding the 87 lots, and what people experience the first several years when construction and build out is occurring with construction traffic. As I had noted to the Planning Commission when that particular topic came up, and some of the residents had spoke out during the public hearing at their meeting, it's always staff's intent that when we get to the final plat and construction drawing phase of reviewing a project, we're going to have to be very purposeful in how we agree with the developer that construction traffic should be managed. We certainly, knowing that kind of the two endpoints of how traffic generally wants to get to the site, either Red Fox Drive to Lakeside Drive or County Road 43, Marsh Lake Road to Lakeside Drive, some accommodation and thought needs to really be put together for how to effectively manage that construction traffic, not only so that we're not putting heavy machinery around, kids or people that are just going in and out of their driveway, but also what condition are those adjacent roadways in, and what's the most feasible way that those construction trades are going to want to get to and from that site. I would expect when we get to that point that something similar to what the city has done with Lennar in routing their construction traffic to their 9th and 10th editions being well signed from the adjacent county roads so that everyone understands what the preferred path is into and out of that site is going to be something that needs much further thought and exploration, particularly as we start to understand the timing of when Marsh Lake Road might get improved. Some details specific about this project. So Woods Drive today wraps around the Woods at Wasserman Lake project. That road is extended in alignment with Woods Drive through this project. It will be renamed so as not to cause any addressing confusion. Because there's a north-south Woods Drive through a portion of the Lakeside Estates neighborhood, that would have the same general addressing sequence. So renaming that road will be important just for that emergency management and general delivery of mail standpoint. Isabel Drive, which today is a stub street serving 4 lots, will be also extended through this project to intersect with that new north-south extension from the Woods Drive intersection, and then another east-west public street going through the property. From a utility standpoint, the majority of the site drains towards the west before it goes into that wetland and then heads north into Wasserman Lake. As part of the preliminary plat submittal, they have identified a filtration system that would help mitigate a lot of the stormwater within the site before it's released into that wetland. There's a portion of the project identified as blocks 2 and 3 that does drain northwesterly and would end up getting piped directly into the storm sewer that was constructed as part of Lakeside Estates. Both sewer and water are being extended from the 2 intersections at Lakeside Drive and Isabel Drive through the project to loop it, and then sewers being stubbed to that plat boundary so that should that adjacent property to the south redevelop, those utilities would help facilitate that and be brought into that project as well. Similar to the Hill Point development, this preliminary landscape plan identifies realization of the new landscaping requirements. Slightly different but similar idea. Marsh Lake Road is identified as a major arterial on the comprehensive plan, so a 40-foot landscape buffer versus the 30-foot landscape buffer on Hill Point is being presented here. Bavaria Road, just as a frame of reference, is identified as a minor arterial, so the different roadway classifications identify as a greater or lesser amount of buffer between the 2 roadways. But this landscape buffer on the north side of Wasserman Lake Woods also being presented with a berm, very consistent with some of the existing properties if you were to look further west adjacent to Marsh Lake Road. And then the similar boulevard tree treatment across all the streets within the project, and then the 3 trees per lot being within this subdivision as well. To remind the council from the discussion that took place at the sketch plat, The first 8 lots on the south side of Lakeside Drive are 80-foot wide, similar to what's in the Wasserman Lake Woods project. And then the first 6 lots on the far west side of this project, 70 feet wide, consistent with what was done in Lakeside Estates. So before blending into more of a smaller lot development itself, providing that appropriate transition in making sure that we're not wholesale changing within a block or a street itself between existing development and new development. To give you an idea of how this project relates to the existing R2 provisions, again, R2 provisions spelled out on the lower portion of this slide, and then the ranges and some of what's actually being presented in the preliminary plat for your consideration tonight identified in the upper part of the screen. In all cases, the R2 provisions are being met, again, in many cases being exceeded. And then for this project, there are 2 different builder partners that have been identified, Pulte Homes and Country Joe Homes. Let me jump back to the plat really quick. Pulte Homes taking kind of the majority of the project with blocks 1 through 5 and block 7, and then block 6, which is the lots that back to or face the wetland, are where Country Joe Homes would expect to build out their product. Example of those home types that Pulte would build within this project, and similarly the types of homes that Country Joe would expect to build out on the block of homes that they would take. At this point, those are kind of the details I have to share. We do have representation not only from the development team, but also the 2 different builders that are represented as a part of this project. Similar to the HILLPOINTE agenda item, there is a public hearing related to the rezoning tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing for the Meadows of Wasserman Lake. Would anybody like to speak? One more time?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
In terms of the water flow.
Can you name and address for the record, please?
Dick Hawley, 5641 Sumber Drive. I'm just looking at this overall from a flow of the watershed and what's going on through the wetlands and along through Marsh Lake. Marsh Lake typically flows up into Wasserman and along that wetland that you've identified on the east side. And I heard you mention that there were going to be some basins and some other things from a stormwater standpoint, but that all flows around into East Auburn, and there are, that aspect already causes some difficulties in terms of rainwater and stormwater. So I'm curious what the provisions are. They weren't discussed as you were presenting this, so if you could, I'd appreciate it.
Kara?
Would you mind speaking to it? It's way more engineering than planner-ish.
Certainly. The proposed stormwater management plan involves constructing some stormwater management facilities in this area, so upstream of the wetland, and then utilizing existing pipes that flow back into other stormwater ponds that exist within the existing neighborhoods.
Which way does the water flow from all the lots and roads and so forth? All flow toward?
Dick, we need to get you on the mic, please.
Mm-hmm. Which way does it flow from the impervious surfaces and from the lots? Does it flow toward the east down to the wetland that's there? Or is there a crown in the middle of that development? Which way does it flow?
Generally, both directions. The split is...
So blocks 1, 5, 4, 7, and 6 all flow more northeasterly, so towards that larger filtration basin that Kara had outlined here. Sorry. So these lots kind of in the core of the project are all flowing this direction, either via swale being picked up in catch basins, routed through storm sewer, and being daylighted into this treatment facility, or blocks 2, the parkland, and block 3 are being sheet flowed via a swale to a catch basin and then being piped into the existing stormwater management facilities that were constructed as part of Lakeside Estates.
And then I would anticipate that this has not been through the watershed district yet with what's going on with.
They've sat
With
down
the
and
runoff
presented what their proposal is and talked about what rules need to be met, but it hasn't gone through their full formal process.
So
at
they
this
haven't been
point.
through any analysis of the loading and the other pieces as to how
Correct.
that's going to impact. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Then I move that we close the public hearing. Is there a second?
So moved.
The, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, public hearing is now closed. Council discussion.
Mr. Mayor, question.
Go ahead.
I'm recalling from the preliminary plat discussion, and this is related to the, I'd say, the significant number of emails that I've been aware of regarding concerns of this project, and it has to do with access to Marsh Lake Road. And I just want to state for the record, you know, Ben, you and I, and actually I think city manager have talked quite a bit about this. My understanding is that it would be ideal to have the connection to Marsh Lake completed now. But because Marsh Lake Road has not been completed, we run the risk of having to redo this section of road based upon the grading changes that most likely will come with Marsh Lake's redevelopment. Is that correct?
That's a fair
Yeah.
estimation, yes.
Yeah, and then so, in my mind, I understand now, and I think I'm fine with not having that there. But I also remembered having a conversation about, and I think this was in the sketch plat phase itself during the council meeting, of a temporary access along Marsh Lake for construction traffic. Is that still possible?
Within the total plan set that the developer received, that staff has reviewed, just to understand in greater detail what all is taking place with this project, they have 2 construction entrances identified, one being from Lakeside Drive at the east intersection with Woods Drive. There's 2 Lakeside Drive, Woods Drive intersections, as well as having one location from Marsh Lake Road. As I noted before, that needs to be a much probably more in-depth conversation, not only between staff and the developer and whoever's coming to actually construct within this project as to which access point is best for which types of activities.
I would be much more comfortable moving forward with this, knowing that there was, at a minimum, a temporary construction
And the
access point from Marsh Lake Road in some way to obligate that will happen, as opposed to routing it through existing neighbors or neighborhoods. And then, in addition to that, what is the timeline for the completion of the connection into Laketown 9th? And previously, I've been told that was before the school buses go this fall. Is that still on track, or is it going to change?
Kara?
I typically do not give a concrete answer to that, since it depends on the settlement of soils. But the goal would be to have it in place before school is open, so that the bus company doesn't have to continue to route all the way around. Settlement is ongoing. It's looking favorable, but if the soil hasn't settled as much as it should, we want them to wait to construct that, because we're going to end up, the road's going to end up being ours, and we don't want to have a road that's going to significantly settle. So we don't want to do it faster than the soils want to.
So is that
settle.
construction, are you driving that, or is someone else driving that and we're just overseeing it?
The geotechnical engineer that was hired by Lennar is monitoring it and reporting back to both Lennar and the city with what the settlement rates are. Lennar is very much interested in getting it constructed as soon as possible because we're holding a large letter of credit for that portion of the road. But I'll have an approval role in terms of releasing them to do the work. So if the city doesn't feel that it's settled enough, we could hold them up from pulling the surcharge off and building the road.
So if it has not settled enough by the time school opens, guessing that it probably won't happen this year.
No, because it's not going to take them that long to remove the surcharge and get the construction on. So if they're saying we need a couple more weeks, I'm probably going to say take a couple more weeks. If something drastic changes, certainly we would report that back to the city council and the public because we get a lot of calls asking when it's going to be open.
Go ahead.
So is there a point where you lose the season and you have to wait till spring? Or is that?
We'd end up making some decisions about whether we could pave the base course. We've paved as late as Thanksgiving. So we've got quite a bit of fall that we could work in. The concrete work becomes a little bit more challenging as it gets colder. So we would end up deciding, do we put down temporary bituminous curb? I think we want to get it open is our goal. So
Sounds like we've got 10 or 12 weeks maybe-ish to work with.
Yeah.
Weather permitting.
Yep.
And I'm very hesitant without some additional access points to support this. And so the construction road, as Councilmember Crowley noted, would also be a concern of mine. I had some conversations directly with the developer, I don't know, after the first meeting or the first presentation of this, and we talked through the timeline, and if I remember correctly, there wouldn't be more than 1 or 2 lots that would actually have a structure on them before that Lakeside Drive connection was through. And then with the construction road, that would probably actually relieve rather than add to the Lakeside neighborhood traffic. Is that fair?
First to the phasing, yes, that's our understanding that there wouldn't be significant home construction. They've got a lot of infrastructure to build other than the lots you'll see later on the agenda tonight, the final plat for these lots that abut the existing Lakeside Drive. The services were all installed for those lots during the first Wasserman Lake Woods development. So those lots are essentially ready to go from having access to a road and sewer. So I don't know what their timing is for starting construction on those. But yes, then figuring out the construction access to get equipment in to do the building of all this infrastructure is certainly something that we have to work through. It's a challenge for me, from my perspective, because Marsh Lake Road is in such poor condition and we're having such a difficult time keeping up with maintenance on it. So having to work through, preferably once they know who their contractor is, what the best routing is to get construction equipment into the site, and then also parking for the workers and deliveries and things of that nature, as Ben noted, is something that we're going to have to work very closely with each other on during the development of the final plat and final construction documents. That all gets spelled out in the final documents that go out to contractors. So we'll need to continue to work through that. Simultaneously, from a maintenance perspective, engineering and public works are giving a lot of thought to whether there's any other things that we can do to Marsh Lake Road in this interim period, since we don't anticipate construction occurring until 2019. As volumes are increasing on the road, it's harder to keep up with dust control and road maintenance, so looking at whether there's some additional treatments that we should do to that road to help the situation. So that discussion can all help with this construction access piece that we'll need to work through over the next bit of time before they come in for a final plat for the rest of it.
Thank you. So with that said, if the final engineering grades had been determined for Marsh Lake Road, would there be a point, and is there any discussion with the owner or the future plat there of getting an easement to put the road through sooner than what he would be doing in terms of developing that?
It's certainly with the road project, we'll be looking to, with Marsh Lake Road, we'd be looking to get the intersection in as part of that initial construction. This isn't something I've contemplated before, but the challenge in making that connection before this were to develop is who pays for the construction of that connection. Typically, that would be built and paid for by the developer. But if we don't have a developer, then we'd have to look at it.
The property owner of that parcel that we're referring to was here during the sketch plat and did give some indication that once Marsh Lake Road seemed to be kind of in process, that might open up his desire to pass along the property for development. So the timing might not be terribly far off from seeing this project somewhat underway, Marsh Lake Road under construction, and whether this folds into being part of the project that's under consideration tonight, or someone else steps forward with something very similar and builds it out, seems very feasible at this point in time.
Thank you.
Councilman Vogt?
Just a couple questions. It's expected that this development will take, 2-3 years to build out? 3 to 4? So there's 80-some houses. I mean, this is not all going to happen at one time.
Correct.
So I think the mental image I get of hearing the neighbors, seeing those emails, is that they can envision this huge construction setting of trucks and all kinds of traffic constantly. But if you're building this out in 3 or 4 years, that's not really going to happen that way. It's not going to be as hectic as it might sound. The second question I've got is, we once talked about having a potential street through the ballpark, a temporary street. Is that discussion out the window?
I know that was generally suggested during the sketch plat, and at this point, that may be generally some kind of a route where that construction traffic may be. I think until we get further into more of the final design phase, we won't know whether that's even something feasible to consider or not.
Okay. Final question, the future plat, where we envision that the street would go through the future plat down to Marsh Lake Road. Is that a certainty? Forgetting about the timing of it, does the city have something to do with how that will play out? So we know that's a 99% chance that that street is going to continue once that area is developed. Is that true?
The city does have full control over whether that connection is made directly to Marsh Lake Road. This connection has already been reviewed by the county according to their spacing guidelines for what they classify Marsh Lake Road to be, and it meets those objectives. So yes, it's entirely feasible, whether it's the current developer or a future developer, even if it's that property owner that decided to undertake platting, the city would have a say to ensure that that connection is made when that property develops.
Okay.
So we can, in fact, require that.
That's correct.
But I think there's a little asterisk, that is, in the event that that owner decided not to develop it, we can't force that connection.
Correct.
It's only at the point where it becomes in play for development that we have control.
So Not in all circumstances. The city could condemn for right-of-way and build the road without getting permission per se from that property owner, but that's a rare circumstance that I don't believe the city has ever actually done. But that, to say that there's no other way for that connection to be made isn't entirely accurate.
We know the owner of that plat is in the real estate business. So there's a high degree of probability that he's going to want to turn over his investment.
Agreed. I just wanted it to be sort of on the table that there are options.
So a question, when we talked about this before, I thought that, I expected to actually see at least a temporary road put in. Can in fact we require a temporary road to be put in now? Or if we don't do that tonight, are we prohibited from doing that when it comes back for final?
You're not prohibited from requiring a temporary road. I think it would be important to identify what that temporary road's purpose is. If it's for construction traffic, I think certainly a condition of the resolution for preliminary plat could say something to the effect of developer working with staff to identify a construction entrance from Marsh Lake Road. If that's generally what's important to the council, that's certainly a condition that could be added to that plat.
So that's a condition I'd like to see added, where we get I imagine there may be some construction traffic that, for whatever reason, may not be able to use it. But to me, the primary purpose of that temporary road would be to take the bulk of the traffic, unless there's some reason that if you've got a low boy or something that can't get through, then it can go around. Otherwise, the primary construction entrance I would like to see as a condition of this be added, in that the construction traffic actually come in off of Marsh Lake Road.
Direct.
Direct. Thank you.
And I would also, I share that sentiment, but I would also suggest that we not only specify the creation, but also the removal. I know there's been times in the past where roads got put in and they were assumed by some to be permanent, and when they weren't, then there was unhappiness. So I think the life of that road should be defined on both ends.
Good.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
if I may, just a question. So I'm not as knowledgeable about this development as you all are. The condition you're talking about, Mayor, and it sounds like there was at least, I saw one other nodding head. If that condition were imposed for direct access off Marsh Lake, are you talking about across the abutting property to the south? Or are you talking about, where are you talking about that access?
Like
So
blocks.
when this was discussed originally at the sketch plat, it was suggested somewhere around the parking area in what would be the park, that they could run a temporary road through that area for construction. That's my understanding.
Correct. My understanding was it was along the east edge of that, where it says on the map, future plat by others, a temporary, basically gravel road running along the western edge of that future plat by others. So not outside of this parcel, but just along that edge down to wherever Marsh Lake Road happens to be today.
Yeah, and so Mayor, just to make that point, I don't have a problem with that. Your code actually says that you can condition preliminary plat on public health, safety, welfare issues. Seems to me that this is pretty squarely one of those. Obviously, you can do anything with developer's consent, but if there wasn't developer consent to that, my concern was about requiring an access over property developer doesn't own or control. But it sounds like that's not what you're talking about, and so that is okay.
So one other question. Ben, you mentioned earlier about the spacing on Marsh Lake Road. Would this temporary road cause any issues with the county?
If it's a temporary road, it shouldn't cause any issues for them. They're more concerned about long-term permanent access points for all traffic, not just what we would restrict to, in this case, construction traffic.
Thank you. Councilmember Gregory?
I think I share everyone else's concerns about the amount of construction traffic that would be going through Lakeside Drive. I agree that going through Block 2, Lot 7 for a temporary road all the way to Marsh Lake makes sense. But then we also need to have some consideration for the people that are on Marsh Lake Road. that road is getting beat up with the amount of traffic that we have, and we have to, I think if we're gonna make the condition that we're gonna put that temporary road in, we need to offer some relief for the residents that are on Marsh Lake Road. They're already getting inundated with the amount of traffic that's already out there. So that's a concern. And then also, I think we're taking a little bit of a leap of faith that rock property is going to get developed. I think Marsh Lake Road, we've got to have 3 access points to this development to the north of it, and we're kind of approving this on a hope and a prayer that rock property gets developed in due time, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, but I don't know how we rectify that, how we put some conditions on it, but just a thought.
Council? No other questions?
I guess one last one, and it's sort of a clarification of a question I asked before in terms of when the connection on Lakeside Drive is made, hopefully this fall sometime, do we expect that to relieve some of the traffic off Marsh Lake Road, that instead of winding back to the west and then coming down Marsh Lake Road, that it'll just, that will unload Marsh Lake somewhat?
Yes. To what degree, I think, is unknown.
Agreed.
But certainly something that staff has already talked about, looking to monitor what's happening on this segment of Lakeside Drive in terms of evaluating intersections and even kids having more of a direct connection to school or to the park. Certainly considerations for this project particularly.
And Kara, is it fair to say in a worst-case scenario, if that connection to the Lake Town 9th Edition doesn't get done this fall, it would go in sometime early next year?
Yeah. Yep.
So
I'm not at this point anticipating it needing to take, I have no indication now that we won't be able to do it this fall, but worst case scenario, it would be spring.
So it's
After
still going to
one
be
more
in before there's
freeze-thaw
significant
cycle.
homes built and additional traffic from this development?
Correct.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, council?
None.
All right. Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance number 418, amending section 109 of the city's zoning ordinance by rezoning all property in Meadows of Wasserman Lake from Ag Industrial District to R2 Single Family Residential District.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
I apologize. I thought we were going to put a condition on that. There was a, is that where the condition needs to be?
I thought it would go in the preliminary plat
Okay.
down
thank
below.
you.
Yep.
So I voted aye for that, by the way.
Okay, so the rezoning passed unanimously. Can I have a motion, or I'll move that we approve resolution authorizing the summary publication of ordinance 418. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That passes unanimously. Can I have a motion with the condition, or I'll make the motion to approve the resolution related to the approval of a preliminary plat for Meadows of Wasserman Lake, with the requirement of the condition being the temporary gravel road with the details to be worked out between the staff and the developer. Is there a second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, that passes unanimously. Real quick, Lord, we got the motion on the summary of publication too?
You did. You've got all of them.
Okay, so that finishes up B. Ben, would you introduce the next one? C, ordinance 419, chapter 28, waterways, please.
Just to throw you off, Mayor, I'll take that one. All right.
Curveball.
We'll give Ben a break from talking. Tonight we have a discussion regarding a proposed ordinance around no slow wake zones and lake levels. And just by way of a little bit of history, this discussion is specifically centering around Lake Sombra. In the staff report, we've provided a bit of history. In 2014, as we all vividly recall, we had a significant rainfall and flooding event And that was experienced not only by Victoria, but by the metro and state as a whole. And at that time, because so many cities were experiencing property and shoreland damage and environmental damage as a result of lake levels, the DNR in 2014 granted cities the ability to enact 30-day no-wake restrictions on lakes. That ability was limited strictly to 2014, although the ability to implement such restrictions are available to cities, provided that they are a procedure for which that declaration is made is included in your code. And so this year, the homeowners along Lake Zumbra have experienced, again, rising lake levels that have been cause for concern on shoreland damage for their properties. And so working with those homeowners over the past approximately 2 months, city staff has been exploring mechanisms that would be available to the city council to be included in the code to deal with high water levels, lake levels on an ongoing basis. So since about May 5th to the present, we've been utilizing 3-day emergency no wakes to limit the wake boat traffic over the weekend. That's been at the discretion of the mayor. But during that time, we've been continuously searching for a more permanent solution. Included in your packet tonight are 2 options, probably not the only 2 options, but the most prevalent options. I'll start by saying that staff is recommending that if you want to move forward with this, you go with option B, and then I'm going to back up and tell you what both of the options are. So option A is referencing that 30-day provision that I had briefly went over. That would allow the city council for any lake within the city to issue a no-wake ordinance that would last for 30 days at a time. The DNR has said that in extreme situations, you could issue multiple 30-day declarations consecutively, but that would not be their preference. That would, again, be by an act of the city council. I've received significant public feedback, particularly from homeowners on Schutz Lake and a little bit on Wassermann, that if the council is to move forward with the 30-day restriction that is proposed in option A, that they would encourage the council to table that tonight and not move forward because they have some questions about the process that the city council would follow for declaring that and what some of those criteria would be. So option A, language is on the screen on the PowerPoint. Again, that is basically giving the city council the ability to issue no wake zones for periods of up to 30 days. Does not define what the criteria for that would be. The option that staff would recommend moving forward with is option B. And in your packet, we provided just a couple of examples. This is a common practice around the metro and state. Specifically, we chose language that's used by the city of Long Lake, applying to Long Lake. It is a no-wake restriction that applies specifically to Zumbra Lake, and the proposal would set the no-wake zone anytime that water level exceeds the ordinary high water line, which is 943.3, as set by the DNR presently. What this would do, there would be a marker. There are several markers on Lake Zumbra. We would evaluate whether additional are needed over the time frame before this became effective if you move forward tonight. But basically, the user would be able to approach the public launch, determine whether the no-wake zone was in effect or not in effect, and then use the lake appropriately. It's going to be easy for the user of the lake, whether they're a homeowner or a public access user, and easy for city staff and Three Rivers staff to implement. Again, the language is here on the screen. Notice of this discussion was published in the newspaper. You will hold a public hearing tonight, and you have both sets of language, or you have the option of providing additional direction and tabling this to a future meeting. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Okay, before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing on this. Would anybody like to address the council? Please. State your name and your address for the record, please.
Hello, Council, Mr. Mayor. Lance Fisher, 6870 Rolling Acres Road, a resident of Schutz Lake. And I would recommend that you go ahead with what Lori offered as option B. I believe that we will eventually want to adopt something a little more comprehensive with regard to no wake restrictions in a future overhaul of the ordinance, but Zumbra needs relief now, and I think that's probably the best approach to get us where we need to be now, and then move forward on a more general plan with more details in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else? One more time, please, Dick, for the record.
Dick Hawley, 5641 Zumber Drive. Also the president of the Homeowners Association on Lake Zumbra. First of all, I'd like to say is restricting water use is not something that many of us on our lake want to do. We've purchased the properties so that we can enjoy the water skiing and wakeboarding and fishing and so forth. So it's not lightly that we do this, and there's a lot of even internal strife and frustration as to what's going on our lake at this point. Second thing I should do is just to say that I have no problem with this going ahead just for being Lake Zumbra, which would be the option B, and not imposing this on other lakes. That, you know, when they run into that problem with emergency, then you may want to consider using this ordinance in that approach. But I know that you also have the ability of doing the 3-day temporary for those other lakes at this point in time, and that hopefully that's sufficient for them. The only thing that in looking at option B that I would like to take a little closer look at would be the waiting period for when it drops below. The triggering at the ordinary high water level is something that we're prepared for and that we're preparing the neighbors for. Ordinary high water level is supposed to be a 1% chance or 100-year event, as they refer to it in the past. And what's happening is that we have a situation that's been existent on Lake Zumbra since the 60s and early 70s, with a known restriction for the water actually leaving the lake and going down through the watershed. And that causes the water to back up. So when we have subsequent large storms, what happens is that we get a stair-stepping effect because the water from the first storm never really drains down through the watershed. So what we've noticed at this point is about the speed that the water drops is about 0.04 of a foot per day. And, you know, if you take that over the course of a week, that gets to 0.4 of a foot. And that's on a good week with no rain. So the issue that we have is that if we're looking out and we drop below the ordinary high water level and then we get a 1-inch rain, which has been quite common these days, that it bounces right back up over the top of that ordinary high water level very, very quickly. So I would like to see a situation where we can either by putting in some time to say that when it goes below the ordinary high water level that and it's been below it for maybe a week's period of time, and that we would then have a cushion if we got some rain that came to, rather than re-implementing this right away afterwards. So just looking at the administration of this and having the flexibility of doing that rather than turning the no wake on and off and causing everybody to have to respond to that in the situation that we would have. We're very cognizant of what's going on. The homeowners are very cognizant. We went over. We are still not down to the levels that we were at the beginning of April from a water level standpoint. It started to climb at the beginning of April, and we are just now coming back close down to what that level is. So, and we're just returned just this last week to go underneath the ordinary high water level. So, I appreciate all of the work that the city has done in supporting us with what's going on, and believe that this would be a good way to try to minimize the amount of effort that it takes, and is the right response in that landowners have the ability of trying to protect the erosion on their property, going back through the watershed district to and all of those limits in terms of how high the riprap and everything can be are all driven by the ordinary high water level. So if you're not familiar with the way that works because you don't live on a lake, that is the reference level that is used so that you can put in appropriate erosion protection. Our situation is a little bit different just because we've been above the ordinary high water level, not just in 2014, but consistently too many days for too long. So that's why we're in asking for a special ordinance at this point in time. And I thank you for your consideration of it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them while I'm here.
Council, questions?
Do you know, is there a consistent correlation between amount of rainfall and lake level change? Like what rainfall equals how much rise in the, I know there's a lot of variables.
Well, if in our lake, because of the way the topography of the surrounding land and the way the water flows, we actually get runoff that not only comes just from the immediate land area right around the sunny Zumbra Lake, but we also get it from coming from Stone and the whole watershed that's there, because that comes back down into the sunny portion of the lake. And in fact, we're even getting runoff that's coming from Minnetrista with what's happening with Woodland Cove. So, if you look just north of 7 with the development that's underway there, we will be seeing runoff that comes from that as well as what comes within the city of Victoria. And the water up there flows from north of Highway 7, where the rotary is by County 11, on that part of it, and it also flows back around to where the wetland is for Stone Lake, just on the north side of Highway 7, and comes through the culvert coming through. And then you go through wetlands and a series of wetlands to be able to, to actually flow out. And the outflow for us, and the reason for my question earlier, the outflow for us is East Auburn, with an 18-inch culvert that supposedly handles that whole upper watershed, and that is our constraint point. And when we've had discussions with the watershed district, it's been about the outflow from Auburn going the rest of the way down the watershed and the impact we would have if they opened that up onto the eastern part of Auburn. That same flow is the one that comes up from Marsh and Wasserman and comes around that way. So any stormwater that comes that way is additional quantity going into that same funnel point at East Auburn. So that's why I made it
complicated. Related to that, I mean, it sounds like it's changing not for the better over time. I mean, and so I guess I wonder about whether the ordinary high water level is ever reset.
It actually, there's probably someone who's better suited to answer that. Lance Fisher, who was here earlier, did a lot of work with Watershed District over time. It is a statistical number that they're looking at, that's developed over a long period of time. Our frustration on the lake is that we think that the ordinary high water level as it sits today on Zumbra is artificially high because there's been this constraint on the flow out of the lake since the 60s and the 70s. And so it's difficult to say. It's a complex calculation that needs to be done. It is looked at over time. And as we see more and more water falling with changes in climate and the nature of the way the rain falls, where we're seeing back-to-back rains of maybe an inch or two a time, then we're seeing that stair-stepping happen much more frequently in probably the last 5 to 10 years.
One more question for you, and that is that the note here says posted at the public launch so that anybody who's launching could see what the restrictions would be. How do you communicate for the property owners who are directly on the lake, who aren't using the public launch?
What we have done is that we have to date been requesting that a no-wake restriction be put in place, and then the city has been responding back to us that it will be in effect for these 3 days, and asked me to send out, as the president of the association, a distribution list out to all of the homeowners. Typically what's happened prior to that, I've had conversations with the homeowners who sent a note myself out saying that I was going to request the no wake restrictions. And so they have the awareness before, as well as sending them an email afterwards telling them what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Council, any other questions for Dick?
Yeah, Dick, just a couple questions. If the high water is 943.3, and that triggers a no wake, would you be comfortable setting a number when it goes back into effect, like 943.0 or 943.1 or 2?
I would be comfortable with that. I don't know what the limitations are based on what I've read with the DNR about what appropriate trigger level would be. I would be willing to live with a situation where we say that we would take off the no-wake restriction after we have exceeded a period of time, and that might be a little bit more flexible, so that once we hit the ordinary high water level and then went above and came back down to it, if we said that we had a buffer of about a week's period of time, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. And based on this number, 943.3, how many days this year would have that wake restriction been on?
It would have been on the full 2-month period that we were talking about, from the beginning of May until just this last week.
And homeowners are okay with that?
Well, first of all, you have homeowners that are directly on the lake that have problems with erosion of their property, and then you have homeowners that are off the lake that would love to be able to water ski. And there's, we have to walk the balance between the people that both ways. I think there is a respect for what's going on, within the neighborhood of each other. Everybody, even those that own shoreline, want to be able to to enjoy the lake and water ski and wakeboard and whatever. There is also, I would say, a large difference between fishing boats, water ski boats, and then you get into the next category, which are wakeboard boats and those that are doing wake surfing. Wake surfing is a technique. I don't know if you're familiar with what they do, but basically what they're doing is putting enough weight or ballast into their boat that they're generating extremely high wakes, so that they're not even using a rope. They're actually
Seen that this year.
boarding on the surf part coming from their boat, and so the wake on that is extremely high, and that's another reason that it's difficult when you're looking at it, that you can't just say no to motor boats, and you can't make a distinction between whether it's wakeboarding, wake surfing, water skiing, or just a 25-horse fishing boat. So there are restrictions from the DNR that keep it open, and it's kind of a all or nothing approach to what it is.
Council, any other questions for Dick?
This sounds like a chronic problem, like whatever's happening here, we don't understand, but it's chronic and it's probably not going to go away soon. And basically, the solution has to come from the watershed district, and it's got to be kind of a global solution, or there's no solution. Am I reading? I used to be on a lake, so I commiserate with you.
You're bringing up a sore point with us right at this point in time, because the role typically of the watershed district has been the one who does the collection of the data and helps you work through all the permitting processes that are necessary to implement a change. We held a meeting here in this particular room with many of the agencies. The DNR was absent, but many of the other agencies and the engineering firms and others that have been involved in looking at this problem. And we, coming out of that meeting, after being told that the watershed district was the one who could help us put all the permits together, Tom Funk, our mayor, actually wrote a letter requesting them to come in and to assist us with the project on what would go on. And initially it looked like they were going to do that, but a couple weeks later they wrote us a note saying they weren't going to participate in that role. And that to me is extremely frustrating, because there's a government group that's funded by the public, and that is their professed role to what they would do. And now they've walked away from doing anything in the project, pushing it back to us. So extremely frustrated with that particular situation. In regard to your comment about, is this chronic, when I moved into my home on Lake Zumbra, I purchased it from the Palmatiers. And both Dale and Marilyn are well known within the city and serve the city. But Dale, unbeknownst to a lot of people, was also one of the founders of the watershed district, and was working toward trying to solve the problems. There was a proposal for fixing this back in the early 70s, It was a known problem at the time, and the watershed district, the DNR, and the park all got into a disagreement on what the natural level of the lake was, and what happened is they went to litigation, and by the time they were done, the money that had been allocated for actually building out physical controls for what was going on was spent, and they are still not in agreement as to what should go on. So it's a very sore issue with us as homeowners. And as an anecdote to add to this whole thing, Claudia, my wife, is an audiologist. We're still very good friends with Marilyn Palmatier. And Claudia was meeting with her just a few weeks ago. And she asked how everything was going and what we were up to. And when Claudia mentioned that I was traveling to culverts and checking culverts and doing that, her response was, "Oh my God, I was doing that in the 60s. Haven't they fixed that problem yet?" So, yes, it's an extremely frustrating thing because we think there are some solutions that can be done. So,
Okay, anybody else would like to address the council?
My name is Austin Kraft, 7090 Rolling Acres Road. So, good evening. Hey, just real quick, we're over on Schutz Lake, and I would agree that option B sounds like the best option for now. Schutz Lake, we really don't have the parameters to even make any decisions. We don't know how high the water is supposed to be, how low the water is supposed to be. And the other concern is, as people build and they start to, it's a man-made problem many times because we take and we grade all the way down to the lake, and then we're concerned that there's waves that are coming up and eating into our shoreline. Well, frankly, if we kept some of the natural boundaries down there, we'd be better off. But a lot of homeowners don't want to do that. So again, I don't think Schutz Lake is ready to make any decisions on how high the water should be or make any decisions on any restrictions. So I'd certainly go look at B and go forward with B. Maybe down the road we'll look at something else with Schutz and certainly work with all of you on that. So I just wanted to give my 2 cents. So thank you so much.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, I move we close the public hearing. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none. Public hearing is now closed. Council discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
I think I have 2 primary concerns. The first one, what I'm hearing is that for a significant percentage of the time since ice out, the water level's been above 943.3. That leads to the first concern that if we enact an ordinance, I don't want to, in effect, turn this into a no-wake lake. And so having an ordinance that specifies the exact level within city code may not be the best procedural approach to do that. It could take an effect, and I'll ask the attorney and ask the city manager too, that we could just state that in code, ordinary high water represents the no-wake zone. Should that be reevaluated and changed, the code would automatically take that into account. So that's kind of the first concern. The second concern is kind of related to that, but expand it to the entire city of Lakes and Parks. And how do we address this issue on every lake without being overly restrictive? And I talked with the city manager a little bit about this previously, and I talked with Ben a little bit about it too, that my preference would be to set in place a procedure that allows any lake that needs to take part in the code an ability to do so. So you're putting the parameters in place that state there is a code within the city of Victoria that says at ordinary high water, a lake is under no wake restrictions, and reference a city council approved page on the website that says these are the lakes that are participating in it, and the first lake is Lake Zumbra with ordinary high water of 943.3. Should Schutz Lake down the road decide they want to participate in that, they would come before council, and council would either approve or deny it, and there would have to be a study that's done on the lake, and there's an expense about those studies. It would have to be approved by the appropriate watershed district as to what ordinary high water is, and then once that's approved, it gets put on the website and everything's in place and ready to go. I understand that there is an issue today with Zumbra that needs to be resolved, and I'm fine with going ahead with that, but my preference would be to solve it once and for all. Thank you.
Councilman Striegel?
Thank you. Are the ordinary, first a question, I guess, and that is that are the ordinary high water levels defined for all lakes? Are they pre-established?
They are established by the DNR.
Okay. I echo Councilmember Crowley's comments that it should be a systematic approach. I don't want to go solving problems that don't exist, so figuring out how to opt in and opt out as appropriate, because recognizing that the lake is people and not all people agree. So when a particular lake gets in and out could be, I guess it could be contentious or challenging, but I would agree that we should have a standard process that's referencing data that's publicly available, not up for debate, and then figure out a way to get the most affected residents, property owners, the say in when that is applied to their property.
And one more point, too, that this is equally important. It has to be, how can I say this? The two ordinances that, or the two options for the ordinance in place today, and again, I talked with the city manager about this, I do like the approach that's being taken there, because there has to be an approach that requires minimal oversight of city staff. You cannot have city staff going down and checking and saying, oh no, it's 7 days after it goes below ordinary high water, and all right, when does that 7 days begin, and now how do you police that? So there has to be something that everybody can look at and understand immediately without having to go to city staff and have city staff be in the middle of it. So.
Is there any kind of automated telemetry that could be just installed so that you can monitor it remotely?
Just look at the sign and people know.
Right, but yeah, okay. And I guess maybe just one other comment, and that is that in general, I support the Plan B. Agree Zumbra's got an issue that needs to be addressed tonight, but I don't think the global solution is going to be designed tonight. So help those people out and figure out the long-term plan in parallel.
Councilmember Vogt? Questions?
I think it's complicated, and option B solves the Zumbra problem in the short run, meaning the next few years. I think there's a real chronic problem here that nobody fully understands, but we should just take care of the issue that's happened with Lake Zumbra and take a simple approach at this point. Admitting that this is far more complicated than we understand. But I'd go with option B.
Okay, Councilmember Gregory?
I agree. Option B seems reasonable. However, I think dovetailing on Councilman Striegel's comments of having somebody have to monitor when this restriction gets lifted, I'd prefer to see some kind of a hard number. Maybe that's 943.2. I don't know what it is, but if we use it as about a week, again, we don't know when that week starts, when it ends, and then somebody's got to monitor that. So if we had a hard and fast number, I think that would make it a little bit easier. Councilman Crowley has a good point. Looking at all the lakes, I think, is reasonable. I'm not sure if we have high water issues on other lakes in the city. Has anybody heard of any, or is that where are we at on high water marks? Does anybody know of any other issues?
We did in 2014, but we do not routine.
Okay. And how many lakes happened? Did that affect?
In 2014, it affected Wasserman, Schutz, Virginia, and Zumbra.
So it does happen. So looking at a broader picture seems to make sense. to put in something overall, but all in due time, we can study that a little bit.
All right. I also like option B. And Dick, I know that you would like to see a week delay. Unfortunately, I don't think that we should do it that way, specifically because even if it drops below the DNR set standard, there's other people that will want to go and use the lake, and I don't think we should make them wait. The DNR has established that number. If I remember right, the stakes are right there at the launch point, so it's easy to see when the water's at the high water mark or not. Is that correct?
If I may, Mayor,
Yep.
those stakes were relocated at the request of a homeowner that has been helping to monitor. This ordinance can't take effect for 120 days under the DNR guidelines. So we will work with Three Rivers to make sure that there are easily visible gauges or markers at the public launch.
So, and the way the ordinance is proposed, it at least gets us down the path to deal with this repeated issue. And then if the council chooses to take up a more systematic approach to this, then we can do that. So that's the only comments I have. Council, any other comments?
One more comment, please, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
Is there a way that we can gather some data for the rest of the year to see how many days exceed 943.3 on this lake? That way we know if we've at least are going down the right path with this ordinance, or we actually need to come back and revoke it.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. Looking at the data that was in the staff report, you can see that the lake exceeded the ordinary high water level sometime between May 17th and May 23rd, and then went below after the last day of record was June 5th. So it was a period of about 3 weeks. The DNR does collect those water levels, and we have homeowners that are voluntarily participating, so that is data that we could easily gather.
Yeah, it'd just be great at the end of the year to, out of 180 days of boating or whatever it is, if over 100 of them are above high water, that's one indicator. And if it's less than 30, okay, that's gives us another indication of which way to go.
Okay. Any other comments, council? I move we approve option B, adopt ordinance 419. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, it is adopted unanimously.
One final comment on kind of water levels. I think in 2014, that was such a significant event that even Lake Minnetonka, that has 15,000 surface acres, was for a very long period no wake. And then, but there was an intermediate step that they had where it was no wake within 300 feet of shore. Granted, not everybody can look at it and go, I'm 300 feet, but it gave a guideline that helped people be more considerate, if nothing else, and not a yes, no, you can, you can't. And I think something of that nature that could be incorporated where it's practical as we think about a big solution should be on the table.
If I could just briefly respond, as we finish the comp plan work that's ongoing, there will be additional revisions to the shoreland ordinances that are brought forward, and those are helpful things that we can consider as we go through that process.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item, new business. Wasserman Lakes Woods. Is this for you, Ben?
Yes, thank you. This topic or item was briefly touched on with the preliminary plat and rezoning agenda item related to the meadows of Wasserman Lake, and I hope you can bear with me that the name change doesn't throw you off. During the preliminary plat discussion, as Kara Guerin, our city engineer, indicated, there are 8 lots within the preliminary plat that already had services installed at the time what Wasserman Lake Woods was put in, the development directly to the north. So 8 of the lots within that preliminary plat generally already have access and utility infrastructure in place to serve them. The request here is just simply to allow the final plat of those 8 lots, one of those already being targeted as a potential model site for Pulte homes as they look to market kind of that new subdivision of the meadows at Wasserman Lake. And then the individual final plat sheets that you see obviously the 8 lots, and then one of the middle sheet of the full attached final plat in your packet identifies the remainder of the property as Outlot A. And Outlot A would serve as kind of a breakdown similar to what was shown in the preliminary plat in terms of the remaining lots and outlots either being proposed for development in the future or reserved and owned by the city. At this point, again, members of the development team here to answer any questions, simply looking for a final plat for the 8 lots that are already served by public utilities.
Thank you, Ben. Council, any questions?
Remind us where the Lakeside Drive currently ends and where that last piece goes in.
Generally right here, this north-south black line that you can see extending to the north is today where the end of that pavement exists. So it's far past one of the 8 lots being shown.
So it exists west of there, and then there's a break to the east.
Correct.
Okay.
So this segment, if you can follow my cursor, that's where the surcharge that Kara referred to earlier is taking place today.
So there's no limitations in terms of access for these 8 lots. It's all on existing roads.
That's correct.
And any other comments? Council?
Mayor,
Yes?
just Ben, to confirm something you and I talked about beforehand. So in doing final platting, we need to make sure that the right parties sign the plat. We usually get title work and have a plat opinion from the city attorney. We've typically tucked that concept into the concept of needing a development agreement and working with the attorney on that and then getting the title work done as part of that. I see that's a condition here, but will there in fact be a development agreement in as much as there's already public infrastructure serving those lots?
I don't know that there will be a physical development agreement. That's something we need to talk about internally, but I have modified the first condition of the resolution under consideration for the council to reference what you had requested, the title work and the requirements of the attorney's plat opinion.
Great.
That is number 1.
Great, thank you.
So, Bob, no issues?
No, I don't.
Okay. Council, any other comments? Can we get the resolution up on the screen, please? Can I have a motion? Go ahead.
We approve resolution related to the approval of final plat for Wasserman Lake Woods second edition in accordance with the conditions from the previous slide.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Next item, reports of the city, that's it. Reports of the city manager, Lori.
Just a couple of brief items. I want to remind anyone that travels by County Road 11 down to Engler Boulevard that the intersection at the railroad will be closed over the next, hopefully, 2 days. They are doing some railroad replacement work, and so if that's your normal route to work, just a heads up to take a different path. And then on a much more fun note, I hope everyone is making their plans to join us downtown on Wednesday. You can come down over the lunch hour and see the Bazillions playing at the Charleston Tune Bandstand. That's one of our 2 lunchtime tunes opportunities. Great for families or anybody that would just rather listen to music than go to work. And if you can't make that work, then come back at night. We have a concert in the park. Through City is the band, same location, Charleston Tune Community Bandstand. And it's also our second classic car of the season. Our first, as I previously reported, was a great success. Starting right off at that strong number of cars and participants that we ended last year with. A new addition this year that the council approved at the last meeting and actually on the consent tonight. Inky Brewery and the VBA will be selling beverages down in Bayfront Park in addition to all of our normal food vendors and beverage vendors. And it's a great time. It's one of the best days in Victoria, and I don't want anyone to miss it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Lori. Bob?
Mayor, I believe I do not have anything to report. That's true, says the manager. I have nothing to report.
Okay. Council?
No report.
No report.
I have no report. So at this point, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned.